When Devin Wilson couldn't understand why minorities kept leaving his company, his father went undercover as a janitor and uncovered the truth hidden behind glass walls. Devin Wilson watched his employees from his corner office. At 42, he had built Phoenix from nothing into a billion-dollar financial technology company. The industry magazine had called him a visionary leader last month. Yet something was wrong. Devin scrolled through the latest employee survey. The numbers told a troubling story. More minority employees were leaving the company. Anonymous comments mentioned an unwelcoming atmosphere. Strange, Devin muttered. In meetings, everyone talked about diversity and inclusion. The company even won an award for it. So why were people leaving? Devin placed his tablet down and sighed. As CEO, he rarely saw how people acted when he wasn't around. Everyone was polite with him. But maybe that wasn't the whole truth. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your father is here," said Maria, his assistant. Harold Wilson walked in with the same dignified posture he had shown during his 30 years as a school principal. At 70, his hair was gray, but his eyes remained sharp. "Son," Harold said, embracing. "Devin, this place keeps getting funnier every time I visit. It's good to see you, Dad. How was your flight?" "Too early," Harold laughed. "But it's worth it to spend the week with you." Harold turned from the window. "So, what's troubling you?" Devin raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think something's wrong?" "I raised you," Harold said simply. "I know that look." Devin hesitated before sliding the tablet toward his father. "We have a problem. People are leaving. Specifically minority employees." Harold read through the survey. "Have you asked Tasha about this? She might know something." "Tasha Green, my Director of Employee Experience." "Yes, we've talked. She notices concerning patterns but doesn't have solid evidence." Later, they attended a management meeting. Devin introduced his father to everyone, including Elaine Parker, the Chief Financial Officer, and Michael Brennan, Head of Business Development. Devin proposed a new initiative to improve company culture. "We should invest more in our internal community. Our turnover is concerning, especially among minority employees." "Are we sure that's a real problem?" Michael asked. "Everyone's getting offered better deals elsewhere." "The exit surveys suggest otherwise," Devin replied. Elaine cleared her throat. "While I support diversity efforts, we need to be careful about costs. Maybe we should table this until next quarter?" Harold watched quietly. He noticed how Tasha Green tried to support Devin but was interrupted twice. He saw the subtle exchange of glances when Devin spoke. Most importantly, he noticed how differently they acted when Devin wasn't looking at them. After the meeting, Harold proposed his idea. "Your company has a night cleaning crew, right?" Devin nodded, confused. "I'd like to join them as a temporary janitor, just for a week." "What?" "Dad, that's the best way to see how a place really works is to be invisible in it," Harold explained. "As a principal, I learned more from walking empty hallways and talking to custodians than from official meetings. People show their true selves when they think no one important is watching." Devin stared at his father. The idea was strange, but Harold's instincts had rarely been wrong. "1 week," Devin finally agreed. "But be careful." Harold smiled. "Don't worry. This won't be my first undercover assignment." Harold Wilson sat in Tasha Green's office, reviewing his new identity. He would become Henry Williams, a temporary evening janitor starting that night. Tasha had arranged everything through an outside cleaning company that Phoenix used for staffing. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Wilson?" Tasha asked. Her concern was clear in her voice. The evening shift can be physically demanding. Harold smiled. I may be 70, but I still do yard work every weekend. And please, call me Harold. Tasha nodded. Your son is lucky to have you in his corner. I'm just gathering information, Harold reminded her. I need to see what's really happening when Devon isn't around. That evening, Harold reported to the maintenance office in the basement. He wore a simple blue uniform with Henry stitched on the pocket. The supervisor, Manuel, handed him a cart filled with cleaning supplies. Floors 15 through 18 are yours, Manuel explained. Most executives leave by 6, but the product teams often stay late. Don't disturb them. Just empty trash, clean bathrooms, and vacuum. Questions? Harold shook his head. I understand. As he pushed his cart into the elevator, Harold felt a mix of nerves and determination. He had spent decades observing classroom dynamics as a principal. Now he would use those same skills to help his son. The first thing Harold noticed was how people looked past him. In his uniform, he became practically invisible. Employees walked by without a glance. Some dropped trash on the floor right next to him, never considering that someone would have to pick it up. By his third night, Harold had established a routine. He kept a small notebook in his pocket, using a shorthand system he had developed years ago for teacher evaluations. Each floor had its own culture, he discovered. On the executive floor, everything was immaculate, but cold. On the product development floors, the energy was different, more collaborative, but still problematic in subtle ways. Harold paused near a wall covered with colorful posters about diversity and inclusion. Together, we rise, said one poster, showing hands of different colors reaching upward. Below it, a young employee walked past Rosita, another janitor, without acknowledging her greeting. Don't take it personally, Harold told Rosita later, as they emptied trash bins together. They don't see us. It's not all of them, Rosita replied. Some people here are nice. They learn our names, say thank you. But others, she shrugged. When you clean offices for 20 years, you learn who sees you as a person and who sees you as a function. Harold wrote that down later. The contrast between the company's public image and daily reality was striking. The diversity posters on the walls meant nothing if the actual diverse staff were treated as invisible. By the end of his first week, Harold noticed people had grown comfortable with his presence. They spoke freely around him, as if a cleaning person couldn't possibly understand or care about their conversations. On Tuesday evening, Harold was vacuuming near a glass-walled meeting room when he saw Michael Brennan with his team. Their voices carried into the hallway. Look, just nod and smile when Devon talks about the diversity mentorship program, Michael told the group. But we don't need to rush implementation. Budget concerns, logistics issues. There are plenty of ways to slow walk this without looking opposed. A young man raised his hand. But I actually think the program could help us find good people. Michael's smile tightened. Jason, we need team players who fit our culture. Devon's initiatives sound good in theory, but distract from our core mission. Trust me on this. Harold kept vacuuming, moving slowly to hear more. This wasn't just one person's bias. It was organized resistance to his son's vision. 2 nights later, Harold was cleaning the CFO's office. Elaine Parker was working late with 2 financial analysts. They were reviewing presentation slides for the upcoming board meeting. These numbers don't tell the right story, Elaine said, pointing at the screen. We need to show that the diversity spending is impacting our bottom line negatively. But the data doesn't really show that, a young analyst replied. Elaine sighed. Devon is brilliant with technology, but he doesn't understand financial strategy like someone with a traditional background would. We need to help the board see what's best for the company. The analyst looked uncomfortable, but didn't argue further. Harold emptied the trash bin silently, his presence barely registered. He felt a tightness in his chest. The careful way Elaine said traditional background spoke volumes. The most disturbing discovery came during Harold's second week. He was cleaning a conference room after hours when he noticed a laptop left open. The screen showed a private messaging group called Phoenix Real Talk. Curious, Harold looked closer. The group included Michael, Elaine, and several other managers. The messages mocked Devon's speaking style during presentations. They referred to Tasha as the diversity hire and made jokes about other minority employees. One message from Michael read, "Another diversity initiative. Another quarter of lower profits. Someone needs to save Devon from himself." Harold took photos of the screen with his phone, careful not to touch the laptop. His hands shook slightly. The evidence was worse than he expected. The undercover work took a toll on Harold. His back ached from the physical labor. But the emotional strain was worse. After decades fighting for equality in education, he was experiencing the same dismissive treatment he thought he'd left behind. "You missed a spot, old-timer," a middle manager said one evening, pointing at a perfectly clean floor. His colleagues laughed as they walked to the elevator. Harold said nothing. He simply nodded and pushed his cart forward. Later, in the maintenance break room, he sat quietly, processing the interaction. "First time someone treated you like you're stupid?" asked Omar, another janitor. He was a former engineer from Sudan who couldn't get his credentials recognized in America. Harold shook his head. "Not the first time, but it still stings." "We see the real company," Omar said. "Not what they show visitors or what your son thinks it is." "My theory is that buildings have two realities, the daytime face and the nighttime truth." Harold found himself bonding with the maintenance staff. They shared stories during breaks, offering insights about the company that even Devon couldn't know. They had watched Phoenix grow, observed every change from their invisible position. "Your son tries to make things better," Rosita told Harold, after learning who he really was. "When he walks through, he looks us in the eye. He knows my name. But one person at the top cannot change what happens when he turns his back." On Thursday evening, during Harold's final week undercover, he made his most important discovery. He was emptying trash cans outside the main conference room when he heard Michael's voice inside. The executive team was preparing for the quarterly board meeting. "The board needs to understand that Devon's leadership is taking us in the wrong direction," Michael was saying. "These diversity programs are expensive experiments with no proven return." "The numbers support our position," Elaine added. "I've highlighted the cost increases and isolated them from other factors. The presentation makes a compelling case." Harold moved closer to the partially open door. "What if Devon challenges the data?" someone asked. "He won't have time to analyze it." "Deeply during the meeting," Michael replied. "Once the board sees these trends, they'll have serious questions about his judgment. We're just helping them see what's been hidden by all the positive press." Harold realized they were deliberately manipulating figures to undermine his son. The board meeting was in 3 days. They were planning to blindside Devon with misleading information that could threaten his position as CEO of his own company. Quietly, Harold moved away from the door. He had heard enough. It was time to share everything he had discovered with Devon. But first, he needed to organize his evidence. His son would need more than accusations to fight back against this coordinated attack. As Harold pushed his cart toward the elevator, his mind was already forming a plan. His undercover work was nearly done, but the real battle to save Phoenix Enterprises was just beginning. The night before the board meeting, Phoenix Enterprises buzzed with activity. The executive floor had been transformed into an elegant dining space. White tablecloths covered the tables, and soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere for the pre-board dinner. Harold adjusted his black vest. For this final night of his undercover operation, he had been assigned to the catering staff rather than his usual janitorial duties. Tasha had arranged it, knowing this dinner was crucial. "Remember, just serve the drinks and stay alert," Tasha had told him earlier. "This is our last chance to find out what they're planning." Board members began arriving at 7 o'clock. Harold recognized them from the company website. Wealthy investors and business leaders who controlled Phoenix's future. Devon wasn't present. Traditionally, the CEO joined these dinners only after the initial discussions. Harold moved quietly among the guests, filling water glasses and offering wine. No one looked at his face. He was just another server, invisible to the powerful people making small talk around him. The group moved to the long table for dinner. Harold positioned himself near Michael Brennan, who sat with 3 board members at the far end. As Harold poured wine, Michael leaned in toward the board members. "Between us, Phoenix needs more traditional leadership to reach our next growth phase," Michael said smoothly. "The market is changing." An older board member nodded. "Devon has built something impressive. But does he have what it takes to lead at this level?" Michael sighed, as if reluctant to speak poorly of Devon. "Look, we all know why Devon was selected as CEO. The company needed a certain image during our early growth. He has technical skills, certainly, but some of us question whether he truly understands the financial discipline required now." Harold's hand tightened around the wine bottle. The implication was clear. Michael was suggesting Devon had been chosen primarily because he was black, not because of his abilities. "His diversity initiatives sound good to the press," Michael continued, "but they're hurting our bottom line. Tomorrow's presentation will make that clear." "That's concerning," said a female board member. "We can't afford to prioritize optics over performance." Harold moved to the kitchen, his heart pounding. This was worse than he'd imagined. Michael wasn't just undermining Devon's initiatives. He was questioning his very qualification to lead the company he had founded. Harold watched from the kitchen as servers brought out the main course. He thought about his son, about the years of hard work Devon had invested in building Phoenix. He thought about his own career as a principal, the times he'd stood up against injustice in his school. Some moments require action, no matter the cost. Harold removed his server's vest and straightened his white shirt. He took a deep breath, pushed through the kitchen doors, and walked directly to the head of the table. The room gradually fell silent as people noticed him standing there, his posture straight and dignified. "Excuse me," Harold said, his voice carrying across the room. "I feel I should introduce myself properly. I'm Harold Wilson, Devon's father." Shock registered on faces around the table. Michael's mouth fell open. "For the past 3 weeks, I've worked here as a janitor named Henry. I've observed this company's operations from ground level, and I've witnessed something deeply troubling." "Sir, this is a private dinner," Michael began, standing up. "Security can—" "Sit down, Mr. Brennan," Harold said calmly. "I've heard enough from you already." Something in Harold's tone made Michael sink back into his chair. "Board members, you're about to be presented with manipulated data tomorrow," Harold continued. "I've documented systematic efforts to undermine my son's leadership and diversity initiatives." Harold removed a folder from under his arm and placed it on the table. In this folder, you'll find evidence that Mr. Brennan and Ms. Parker have been deliberately working to make diversity initiatives appear costly and ineffective. They've isolated costs without showing benefits. They've delayed implementation while pretending to support these programs. Harold's voice remained steady as he pointed to specific documents. Here are screenshots of a private chat group called Phoenix Real Talk, where executives mock minority employees and plan ways to, quote, save Devon from himself. Here are my notes documenting patterns of behavior toward maintenance staff, who are predominantly people of color. The board chair, a distinguished woman named Patricia Morgan, picked up the folder. These are serious accusations, Mr. Wilson. They are facts, Ms. Morgan. Facts I've witnessed firsthand and documented carefully. My career as a school principal taught me how to observe and record patterns of behavior objectively. Michael stood again, his face red. This is ridiculous. You can't just spy on employees and make wild claims. I didn't spy, Harold replied. I simply existed in spaces where you thought no one important was watching. The real Phoenix Enterprises operates in the shadows, when people like my son aren't in the room. The doors opened, and Devon Wilson entered. He stopped abruptly, taking in the scene. His father standing at the head of the table, board members examining documents, Michael's angry face. Dad? Devon said. What's happening here? Tasha Green entered behind Devon. I called him, she explained to the room. He needed to be here for this. Harold turned to his son. I'm sorry for the dramatic entrance, but it couldn't wait until tomorrow. They were planning to blindside you at the board meeting. Devon approached the table and looked at the documents the board chair was reviewing. His expression remained remarkably calm as he flipped through pages of evidence. Ms. Green helped me obtain these screenshots legally, Harold explained. As Director of Employee Experience, she has authority to investigate reports of discriminatory behavior. The board chair looked up from the evidence. Devon, are you aware of any of this? I knew something was wrong, Devon replied quietly. But I didn't know it went this deep or involved my executive team directly. He turned to Michael, who was still standing. Is this true, Michael? Have you been actively working against me? Devon, this is being blown out of proportion, Michael said. We have different views on company direction, that's all. Your father is making this personal. The chat group makes it personal, Devon said, holding up a particularly offensive screenshot. The manipulated financial data makes it professional misconduct. Devon looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member. Then he turned to Michael, Elaine, and two other executives implicated in the evidence. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately, Devon said, his voice firm but controlled. Security will escort you from the building tonight. Your personal items will be packed and delivered to you tomorrow, Elaine gasped. You can't do this without a CEO. I absolutely can, Devon interrupted. And the board can review my decision if they wish. But I will not allow anyone who undermines this company's values to remain in leadership. Devon nodded toward the door, where security personnel had appeared, summoned by Tasha. As the four executives were escorted out, stunned silence filled the room. Then the board chair stood up. I think we've seen enough to cancel tomorrow's board meeting, she said. Instead, Mr. Wilson, Devon, I suggest you prepare a comprehensive plan to address these cultural issues. The board will fully support you. Devon nodded, then walked to his father and embraced him tightly. Thank you, he whispered. Harold smiled. Some lessons can only be learned when no one thinks you're watching. I learned that as a principal. Now you've learned it as a CEO. The weeks following the board dinner brought major changes to Phoenix Enterprises. Devon called an all-staff meeting to address what had happened. "We're rebuilding our company culture from the ground up," Devon announced. "Not with posters and slogans, but with actions and accountability." The board fully supported Devon's plan. Their first action was creating a direct line between employees and board members. Any staff member could now submit anonymous feedback that went straight to the board's ethics committee. Tasha Green stepped into her new role as Chief Culture Officer. Her office moved to the executive floor with a larger budget and expanded authority to address workplace issues. The company tackled pay inequality next. A complete review revealed troubling patterns. Women and minorities consistently earned less than their white male colleagues in similar positions. "We're fixing this immediately," Devon announced, authorizing raises that eliminated these gaps. The company also changed how it set starting salaries to prevent future inequities. Phoenix launched a mentorship program with specific goals and regular progress reviews. Senior leaders who successfully mentored employees from underrepresented groups received recognition. Devon also improved conditions for maintenance and support staff. Their wages increased, health benefits improved, and clear paths for advancement were created. Harold agreed to stay on for 6 months as a special consultant on company culture. He set up his office in a central location where employees from all departments could share their experiences. 2 months into his consultancy, Harold and Devon shared dinner at Devon's home. Their conversation turned reflective as they watched the sunset. "I always wondered if I truly belonged in that CEO office," Devon admitted. "Every meeting, there was this voice wondering if I was only there to check a diversity box." Harold nodded. "That doubt, it's the burden we carry. But that doubt also made me work harder, see things others missed." "Your success isn't in spite of your identity," Harold continued. "It's partially because of the resilience and perspective it's given you. You built Phoenix because you saw possibilities others missed." Their conversations continued throughout Harold's time at Phoenix. They spoke about leadership, integrity, and the difference between symbolic gestures and meaningful change. 1 year later, Phoenix Enterprises held a company-wide celebration after their most successful quarter ever. All employees were invited, not just executives or office staff. Devon stood on a small stage, looking at the transformed company. The leadership team beside him now genuinely reflected his original vision. "A year ago, we discovered that our company had 2 faces," Devon told the crowd. "The one we showed the world, and the one that existed when no one important was watching. Today, those 2 faces have become one." He raised his glass toward his father, who stood quietly at the back of the room. "Phoenix is rising not just as a successful company, but as a place where everyone is seen, valued, and belongs. That's not just good for our people, it's good for our business." Harold watched his son with pride. The company had been transformed, but so had Devon. The self-doubt hadn't vanished completely, but it no longer held him back. As the celebration continued, Harold slipped away quietly. His work here was done. But the lessons of the Undercover principle would continue to shape Phoenix Enterprises for years to come.